Well, Scott, thanks for coming on. Just for our viewers, right? I mean, normally we're a podcast, but we're going big time today.
Good thing I
Just,
put on a shirt with the
right?
collar.
Yeah, I have a face for radio, so it's kind of rough. But just introduce yourself. Your name, your company, those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to do this. Was expecting a podcast. Glad I shaved, or maybe I didn't. So my name is Scott Petry. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Authenticate. We build Silo, which is a secure, virtual, one-time use browser that lives in the cloud.
Okay.
The idea with Silo is that instead of the browser running on your machine or on your network, we keep all web code out in the cloud, out on servers that transcode that session into display information, and when the session's over, we delete it. We purge that instance, and you've been protected while getting full access to the web.
Yeah, so all the stuff that and a huge amount of attacks come through some sort of web activity.
A link
right?
clicked is the root of all evil.
Yeah. How do you sort of think about, I'm curious, I mean, that model is that we've seen a couple of different ways, particularly you hear it sort of with virtual desktops
Sure.
and those, but you guys are a little bit different than that.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
Yeah, so I would say that we've done a really nice job of integrating things, but I would say, I mean, we have some patents and all of that, but there's no underpinning of our technology that's inherently new. We rely heavily on virtualization. We rely heavily on containerization and kernel hardening up in the cloud. We rely heavily on transcoding of information from one format to another. We add things like credential management for IT to manage controls to cloud applications. We have a policy framework, so you can define how a browser should or shouldn't work. I think where our innovation has come from was combining all of those things and making them resident in the browser. When you launch our product, it looks like, it feels like a regular browser. It feels like it's a browser running on your environment. If you're running a VDI stack, there's metaphor shear, you have to open a browser in a desktop window or things like that. There's performance issues, and ultimately you're just running the same browser that you would run on your local environment anyway, and so the virtual environment can be at risk by the same attack surface that would attack your local environment. I think what we've done is really packaged all of the things that we think need to live together to make the browser a secure and manageable asset for IT and embed them together. That's why we call it a cloud browser. There's a lot of market attention around web isolation and remote execution. That's cool, it's part of what we do, but we say we're a cloud browser. We're a fully resolved, fully functional, policy-defined browser in the cloud. It's not a subset of your browsing environment. It's the browser you should sit in to stay 100% secure from the web.
And I think through, I mean, obviously great, I'm surfing the web, I'm going to look at stuff, but I think about, particularly in an enterprise world where maybe, particularly as we have more sort of SaaS solutions, so the actual applications that I'm accessing may also, I need to think about, I'm actually attaching documents, right? Or I'm pulling a document down from a website, right? Like
That's right.
or I'm building something like a new website with Squarespace or something like that,
Right.
where there is interaction between the browser and the sort of endpoint, the computer. How do you kind of think through that? And
it's a great question, and in fact the company is called Authenticate rather than some security mumbo jumbo thing, because when we started thinking about this, we realized that the browser is not defined by any single use case. In fact, individual users have multiple use cases of the browser. You might have that Squarespace tab open, and you might have your Facebook tab open right next to it in the same browser. You have this conflation of work and personal information. What we wanted to do was to make sure that the browser could be configured for the specific mission of the administrator and the user. If you should be doing things like uploading data, art files for publishing your website, downloading data, clinical trial transcripts that you need to type in, for your transcription app in a regulated industry, financial people dealing with spreadsheets, copy paste if you're a developer pulling scripts off of Git or something like that. The browser can support that. It's not defaulted on necessarily, or it can be defaulted on, of course, but the administrator gets to make a determination. For Andy, he gets a certain set of capabilities and functions in the browser because this is what his job entails. But the person who's doing travel reservations or the receptionist ordering lunch off of a catering website, that shouldn't necessarily have the same level of entitlements or policies. So we built this framework, and it touches the inherent security of the isolation and the remote nature of our browser. This other sort of circle that we call identity and access management, the ability to define controls for what devices can access the profile, what websites people can go to, how are credentials managed, and the third being policy, how do you regulate those users' activity? Those three things combined together, and our product silo is really at the center of it. That's why we call it a cloud browser. It's a different proposition than a regular browser or a security layer on top of the browser. It's a designed from scratch, fully resolved, secure and manageable browser.
And how one of the things that I think about is, things are often interested in the gray, right? Like, I might have a work computer, but I'm doing stuff on it that isn't necessarily work related.
Yeah.
How do I, and if this now is my default browser, how do I as a person get comfortable that, that you guys or my company isn't recording what's going on there, right? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, so it's a great question, especially in today's climate. Our privacy policy is extremely explicit in terms of what we capture and what we do with it. In fact, if you scroll down to the bottom of our webpage, there'll be a thing that says, why should you trust us, right? Why should you trust any cloud provider? We make our disclosures right up front. We consider the data to be the customers. The data that we collect in its default configuration is basically, nothing. We don't even store URL data of what you're visiting. If you're an administrator in a firm and you need to audit and oversee what your employees are doing, which especially in the US is kind of a requirement, we give our commercial customers the ability to give us their public key so we can encrypt their log data with a key that they control. We don't get access to their data.
Gotcha.
We then give them APIs to extract their data, decrypt it, and do whatever they wish to do in terms of oversight, compliance, disclosures, whatever. In the instance that you described, where an employee might be accessing a gray area, which is a perfect use case for us, but they might not want their company to see what's going on, we're really no different than the user using a browser from the corporate network anyway. Right? That is a relationship based on the acceptable use policy or the terms of employment between the employee and the employer. We give the employer a greater level of control over encryption and deletion of that data. If you're an end user and you're a commercial customer of ours, then you get to determine exactly what data you store in our environment as well.
How do you think about not being a potential security threat to, somebody who, because you're now, as you grow and become more sort of important, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about essentially the tenancy that you're holding and the even just the metadata, right? I don't necessarily need the stuff, but just to know your activity, that could be valuable if I'm...
So I'm going to answer it in a few ways, because how do you secure your systems is an unanswerable question. I'm going to talk about what we do today and how we think about that, and then I'm going to talk about the existence proof of my last company. We designed the security as a core competence for us, and a big part of our security is the fact that after every browser session, we tear down that entire containerized instance of a browser and a file system. So there's no state or persistent that lingers from session over session. So if you stumble across, there is the anchor root kit that got dropped through a malvertising exploit a few years ago. You stumble across New York Times or BBC or something like that. You could have a advertising cookie that could, talk to a CNC server back, over a chip. If that gets dropped in our environment, it's neutered in terms of what APIs it has to the local environment. Everything is basically ring-fenced in that specific container. And when the session ends, we throw it away. So we feel like our surface area is the browser like anybody else, but that exploit surface area is a containerized and secure browser that's a one-time use browser anyway. It's like rubber gloves, right? You change your oil, you throw them out. You don't need to worry about your hands getting dirty again. You pick up a new pair of rubber gloves from the box, and you change your oil again, if you're an oil changer. A lot of people
I've done it. I haven't done it in a little while, I'm going to admit.
Yeah. Now, we have customers across regulated industries, financial services, healthcare, We have a lot of legal firms as customers. We have a lot of federal government customers. None of them would sign a contract with us without doing some level of red teaming or pen testing us, some level of requirement for security disclosures, some level of auditing our processes, right? And we're in process right now with FedRAMP certification, following the NIST standards for storing non-TS information on public cloud servers. Our website speaks to this as well. Authenticate is a company born from another disruptive cloud company. When I started Postini in 1999, the idea was to use internet infrastructure as a way to identify security and content compliance issues in an email stream. And we figured out a way to, without being a store and forward mail server, to flow massive amounts of mail through our system, analyze the text components of it, and dispose of a message. It worked really well for things like, recognizing spam and recognizing viruses, and that's how we built a bunch of our business. But our customers used us for inbound and outbound content compliance for things like social security numbers or account numbers. They used us for conditional encryption when they're sending mail to a third party that required encryption. They used us for things like legal discovery and retention, so that we would collect and store copies of customers' emails and then give them index tools to investigate it to support the legal discovery process. That was an 8-year company. We had a 97% renewal rate. When we sold to Google, we were processing 1.5 billion email messages per day, so literally trillions of email messages with the broadest spectrum of desirable targets from an information security perspective without an information security breach, either internal or external. So that team that built Postini is the team that has built Authenticate. We take not just data security, like securing systems very importantly, but we also take how do we assure the integrity of the customer data. As a service business, trust is hard earned and easily lost. If we screw that up, our customers aren't going to renew, and that's a hard position to be in as a vendor.
Yeah, I mean, I think a testament to a good team, but also I was impressed kind of as I roll through a lot of your materials. It's a simple story, right? I mean, and that's that's a compliment.
Thank
right?
you. Yeah, we don't want to bamboozle people with BS. IT's fuse is blown. Collectively, their fuse is blown with all of the mumbo-jumbo going on. If you look at the stats, $100 billion spent last year, according to Gartner, 90-something billion, on security systems, 167% increase in ransomware exploits, 2.5 billion data records exposed, like a maddening amount of exploits while IT is spending more and more money. Something isn't working. And we looked at this and said, we're not going to get the attention of IT by whiz-banging them with our technology. It has to be a very simple solution. It has to be a simple construct. We say in our company, it has to be obvious in hindsight what we're doing. Run the browser on our servers, not your devices. You've shifted your exploit surface area to disposable infrastructure. It's a liberating proposition. It's conceptually very easy. Operationally, you have to contend with budgeting and purchase patterns and things like that. But it's a very inherently simple message, and we strive to keep it very simple. One of the things we're doing at RSA to try to accentuate the disjointedness of the marketing messages and the reality of IT is we've introduced this new line of fake security products, and fake is an acronym from our persona Francis Archibald Keyes Esquire. He is a long-term cybersecurity snake oil salesman from a long family of cybersecurity buskers and busters. Today's magnificent product is Tincture for Advanced Persistent Threats. So you simply sprinkle this around your perimeter and all of your advanced persistent threats will go away. And we have extract of artificial intelligence. We have a solve to protect against nation-state actors.
All the buzzwords.
All the buzzwords, right? It's right here in this remarkable product.
So, I mean, I think we've covered your product, and I think part of the simplicity of the message is what's resonating with people. But I'm curious, because a lot of the people who are listening are themselves kind of in this space. How have you kind of gotten the ear of people, and how are you kind of getting traction, all of those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this clever marketing stuff aside, that doesn't close deals, right? It might make people aware of the discontinuity, the disjointedness of the market message versus the reality. We try to talk to customers in very reasonable terms. We are a product-first company. If the product doesn't work, nothing else is going to work. And we spent a lot of time building and refining the product before we even started selling. We joke inside of our company that we've never had a bad meeting. We've never had a CISO or a CIO or a director of IT or a director of risk or anyone say, that's a silly idea. Why on earth would I do it?
Yeah.
But there's a practical reality from, that a great idea doesn't translate into operational deployment. And so we have to get very good about making our product easy to consume, easy to onboard users, make it deliver inherent value from day one, and help customers through that. I think our marketing messages need to maintain the simplicity, so thank you for saying that. And we think that we need to speak to the user in all of us. I have kids that are on iPads, and I worry about their security. They use Silo when they got to go on a browser. But I think about my organization, and we spend a lot of money on security, but there's always that feeling like, have I done enough? Am I secure? We want to speak to people, the user in all of us, to say, you can let your browser fears go away. You can trust another vendor to take on your browser fears. And we want to sort of keep hammering that, but that needs to be buttressed by a product that works out the door, well for the customer and solves their needs, and then a bunch of the operational support aspects, deployment, excellent post-sales training and support services to make sure our customers are successful with it. We saw this at Postini. We had a 97% renewal rate of our customer base over 8 years. It isn't because we stopped the conversation with the customer when we closed we closed the contract. That's actually the start of the conversation with the customer. And I think there's a class of customer that really values that.
So where are you starting to see success? Like who are the people that are like grabbing this?
Yeah, it's been a discovery process for us, and I would say we've had a few sort of branches that didn't pan out for us. One of our early horizontal markets for adoption was the legal community. So we have a significant number of the largest law firms in the country today that are using us, and it's sort of exactly the use case you mentioned, which is gray area or personal access to resources from work. IT needs to shut down their access to systems inside of law firms for compliance or for client reasons. But partners own the firms, and they get to say, hey, no, I'm going to Outlook, I'm going to Facebook, I get to use my computer for the things that I want to do. We read that sort of tea leaf of our success in that industry to think we were a general purpose IT solution. And so we spent a fair amount of time, a year and a half or a year ago, trying to do a general IT solution. Hey, use our browser instead of your browser. It didn't go very well. The last thing people want to change is their browser for general consumption. It's not a technology issue, it's a psychology and a behavior pattern issue. So what we've done over the last 8 or 9 months has been adopt what we call a mission focus, which is instead of trying to knock on IT's front door and say, hey, try a secure browser, they understand it. We've had great meetings about that, but it's hard to deploy that. Instead, we knock on the front door and we say to a financial services firm, we know that you're governed by Banking Secrecy Act and you have know your customer and anti-money laundering requirements. We know your users are out on the internet in harm's way doing research on your business clients. We know that you're pulling dirty lines using virtualization or endpoint sandboxing, and it's a costly and cumbersome way to do it. Here is a way for you to do that in a much more effective way. Give us your AML team and we can prove to you the utility of the product. We have media companies in the same model. We know you have reporters in the field. They're subject to nation-state surveillance, right? They're talking to sources and they need to maintain client confidentiality or source confidentiality. You have to do research to support your cases, to your stories, in nasty parts of the internet. Here is a better browser. They can go to any Wi-Fi network, use any computer, and they can get to a single secure browser that holds some state or remains completely anonymous, and your reporters and your fact checkers and your researchers. So our focus right now as a business is to build our base of business around those targeted mission use cases. And what we're seeing, which is really exciting, is we're seeing some of those first successful deployments in the SOC team and the NOC team moving to lateral deployments, where customers are saying, hey, you've solved my hardest problems for my most at-risk users. Now I'd like to look at adopting you enterprise-wide.
You get a beachhead and then you expand.
Yeah, we've seen that most notably in the government, where we've sold to some military organizations that are out in remote locations and need to get access to mission or tasking resources from the browser. And then that's moved to more of a broad-based, hey, our personnel are getting to Facebook, they're getting to Outlook, they're trying to stay in touch with their friends and family for morale browsing. Why don't we just use this for all of that? So it's been a very gratifying, sort of through the back door or through a targeted use case, but it's been very gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a new way of kind of thinking about it, but you sell the...
It's old school.
It's
old school.
You sell the recipes along with the kitchen tools, right?
Yeah, exactly. We want to know who buys and why. The more targeted we can get on that, repeat that, expand from there.
Well, I've been sort of hammering you with questions. Anything else you want to hit before we close?
Yeah. Are there any other tinctures or tonics that we should be providing to?
I mean, you've hit upon probably the biggest ones I'm hearing, right?
Yeah.
And I think I feel for the CISOs of this world, right? Because it's a hard job, and it's hard to say no when someone might have a cure.
Yeah.
Right.
So and we're all selling cure-alls, and there really aren't cure-alls. So I do actually have a question for you, and I wonder how you or your listeners think about this. There is a lot of focus on exotic exploits and technologically advanced solutions. But if you look back at some of those exploits that we saw over the last year or two, many, if not most, can be attributed to very simple IT hygiene or IT configuration issues. WannaCry, the largest ransomware exploit ever, attributed to firewalls leaving SMB ports open, 139 and 445. The DNC or RNC losing data in Amazon's cloud, Verizon losing data in Amazon's cloud because they set permissions to public. To what extent is the cacophony in the market and the press attention to exotic, nation-state actors or statistically improbable threats drowning out IT's ability to just stick to the basics and do the things that matter to secure their environment?
Well, I mean, that, if it leads, it bleeds, right?
For sure.
If it bleeds, it leads. I mean, the sort of regular everyday, there's no story there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the short answer from a media's perspective. But I think, I don't know. I mean, I think also people are fallible, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that they're going to be always making mistakes. And I actually, one of the reasons that we started this podcast was to have a more sort of sane conversation where we actually can talk about what matters and what's real. And so I guess I'll turn that back on you. And other than your own product, what have you seen out there that's relatively new that you thought is really cool and you're like...
Yeah. So I'll go back and say the coolest thing I think that's going on right now is back to basics. Configure your firewall, segregate your network, implement access controls to the resources that matter. There's no reason for everybody to have access to everything on the network, right? IT should get back in control of patch Equifax, patch your servers. You don't lose mortgage data for you and me, right? I think the back to basics. In terms of technical solutions, I think there's some really interesting things. I think Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1 DNS
I love that.
I love it. I love what Cloudflare is doing, right? And they're in a leveraged position to deliver things like that. I think that's really interesting. I think, full disclosure, I'm on the board of a company called UpGuard that has just launched a thing called BreachSight, which basically gives customers an outside-in view of where they're vulnerable across cloud assets, as well as their vendors. So I think I would stray away from more technically advanced point solutions, SIMs with more real-time analytics so you can hire a data scientist to figure it out.
I've already got a million. Why am I want a million more?
Exactly. AI at the endpoint. It's like that data's already in your network. Maybe think about keeping it out of your network rather than deeper analysis of it. So I think there's some alternative sort of disruptive paths to provide some security, some awareness, some, back to basics, some simple information on the things that matter to customers. We think our premise is simple. It's not a silver bullet for all aspects of cybersecurity, but where the browser matters, our browser is a great, easy solution to deploy to remove that as a point of vulnerability.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Scott, thanks so
Good.
much.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Yeah.